This is It's Not In Your Head podcast with Dan and Juz. Dan is a doctor and Justine a pain coach. We've come together to find ways to manage complex chronic pain better for both patients and providers. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of It's Not In Your Head. Justine Feidelson here with Dr. Dan Bates. Hey Dan.
Morning again, Juz.
Thank you. Afternoon over here, creeping into late afternoon. But today we are going to continue our discussion on sleep that we took a initial deep dive into on the last episode, going over some sleep basics. And then depending on how intrusive your symptoms around that are, we covered a lot of the diagnoses and sleep disorders that you might want to get treated, get referrals for, as well as some of the medications that you could use given those situations and to manage things short-term rather than long-term. So from an interventive perspective, or depending on the severity of the symptoms that you're experiencing with sleep, make sure you go back and listen to the last episode. Today, we're going to get into all of the sort of stuff you still have to do, even if you have a sleep disorder or other things, but in particular, if you have insomnia. So that's the disorder that we're going to dive into more today, because other disorders require more than just these conservative strategies, but they are extremely important. You cannot get far on sleep if you don't do this stuff. If you just rely on medications or being knocked out at night, you're screwed, because that does not translate to sleep quality, to having the cognitive function and the energy that you want long-term. So those can help you a little bit. It's kind of like supplements. They're, you want to focus on
Sprinkles
the nuts and
on top.
bolts. Yeah. You can't improve your sleep with sprinkles. You have to improve it with the actual behaviors.
Got to bake the cake.
Got to bake the cake. Yes, that's it.
Sprinkles on top. So,
yep.
All right. So, Juz, you can bake the cake. So I did all the talking last time. Let's dive into it. Can you just outline your structure that you think about, your internal, external, et cetera, et cetera? And then let's break down each one of those components to sleep. I love this stuff and the way you've done it. And so it's super useful. So
appreciate that.
Hold on to your hats. Here we go.
I don't think anyone's ever hyped sleep up as that exciting before, Dan. People are going to be like, I don't know about that. But I find it exciting too, mainly because it does really matter and it does really make a difference. And when people start to feel better and you start to, see the results of these habits, you can't help but be kind of excited about it, even though sometimes it seems simple or obvious. Sometimes it's hard to do things that are seemingly simple, or we just don't really do a good job doing them. So the way I break down sleep, because it's there's a lot going on and there's different pieces and there's circadian rhythm and sort of ancillary topics, but it basically boils down to what are the internal / behavioral things that you're doing or not doing versus the sort of environmental or external pieces, whether literally in your bedroom environment or from like a broader 30,000 foot view perspective with the behaviors outside of that. And circadian rhythm then falls into like a broader, environmental aspect of either making sleep easier or harder. Everything that you're doing is either making it more of an uphill battle or decreasing that barrier to entry. So from an internal behavioral sort of perspective, a huge piece of it is stress. Obviously, stress affects a lot in the context of pain as well. But with sleep in particular, if your cortisol levels are high all the time or higher than they should be, a regular person who's got regular cortisol levels will have it coming up around like 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, which is starting to trigger and signal, hey, it's time to wake up in a few hours to our system. So your cortisol levels start to come up around 2 or 3 a.m. so that you wake up around 5, 6, 7, whatever that timing might be for you. When your cortisol levels are too high to begin with, when they come up as they should around 2 or 3 a.m., it's bringing you up out of sleep rather than leading to that in a few more hours. So that's why if your stress levels are high all the time, it can be a piece of why you're waking up early and struggling to fall back asleep at night. Besides, obviously, then making it harder to downregulate and get to a peaceful state of calm, basically. So mood management, whether anxiety related or more of a depression piece, is also an aspect of that, obviously, and having tools and strategies to be able to kind of on demand downregulate, and whether it's through breathing or through release techniques or through mindfulness recordings, right? Have a way where you trigger a certain response from your system rather than being kind of dependent or going about it like willy-nilly when I feel like falling asleep, or that's not very dependable. And you really have to train your body to be more consistent. And under that bucket of stress as well is kind of piggybacking on 2 episodes ago with the pacing episodes, you have to have some capacity. And if you have no capacity, right, you're going to have higher stress levels. So look at where, from a daytime perspective, can you maybe mitigate some of that bubbling over so that you're not so overloaded when you're trying to, bring it down at night. Those are some of the cortisol stress pieces under behavioral factors. We talked about snoring a bit on the last episode. So listen to that one if you have personal experience with that, or if your partner is like, hey, you snore. It's not just about not annoying your partner. It is affecting your sleep quality.
Though not annoying your partner is good.
It's also helpful, though. Also not frowned upon. Yeah. Some of the obvious ones, but things that we sometimes don't want to change are caffeine, nicotine intake. Avoiding stimulants should be pretty self-explanatory. The challenge is when do I have to stop drinking coffee? I do 2 p.m. Because of coffee's half-life and how long it's in your system, 2 or 3 p.m., maybe at the very latest, is when you should ideally cut it off. If you're someone who notices no impact of caffeine on your system and you'd be a fast metabolizer, you could maybe go later than that. But that's the problem, is caffeine's half-life. So a lot of it is still in your system at 9, 10, 11 at night if you're drinking it later in the day. So it's not caffeine. Don't cry, Dan. I know.
No, that's not happening. That just drops my productivity too far. No. So no, I try my latest coffee. I try and go at 1 o'clock unless I'm like in massive struggle town.
Yeah,
and then I essentially have a placebo coffee later in that because it does nothing. It just makes me feel like emotionally better. So it's and for me too.
Yeah, I don't notice any boost from coffee. It doesn't really I don't think I feel better. It's just part of from an energy perspective, better. It's just part of my morning. This is what I do. Part of my routine.
Yeah, just social
now
piece.
I'm starting work. Yeah, triggers all
that. Across from the clinic, there's a cafe I get most of my stuff from. And like if I'm walking in the afternoon, the girls will say, leaded or unleaded, Dan? And I'll go, unleaded. I'm like, why?
Lettered, yeah.
Leaded.
An easy cutoff is 6 hours before sleep, at least. So if you want to make it a little bit more individualized to when are you falling asleep rather than my arbitrary 2 to 3 p.m. But that's why I say that, because add 6 hours to that, you shouldn't be later than that for bedtime.
Okay.
All right.
Nicotine?
I don't know about
my
a time
nicotine
cutoff.
is never, so...
I mean, yeah, it's not a time cutoff thing. It's a better to not do it.
The interesting data around nicotine and how it makes pain worse and how the chemicals within cigarettes actually amplify pain. So
that's the bigger piece in this discussion.
That's the bigger piece for me. Yeah. So
yes, I agree.
If I have someone who smokes, I'm more sort of focusing on that rather than...
Or trying to get them to stop, like from a habit perspective.
Smoking makes your pain worse, literally makes it worse. So
it's like all the metabolic stuff.
So so I'm on a never for that one, but anyway,
it would be
smoking's a whole other topic. Okay, alcohol.
Yeah, another have no fun one. And alcohol is a big trigger too for a lot of people from a sensitization perspective. So while yes, alcohol can make falling asleep easier, right? We all have done I pass out after I drink too much. That's the problem. You pass out, which is different than slowly falling asleep and downregulating your system and going through those stages of sleep that we talked about in the last episode. So the challenge with alcohol is it makes you feel like you fell asleep faster and slept better, but actually you have a disrupted sleep architecture like Dan talked about. It disrupts then your quality of sleep and it increases the amount of times that you wake up, whether you're conscious of that possibly or not. So that's where it's like you wake up having slept through the night, but you don't feel refreshed. And I think if you have fallen asleep after drinking, you can attest to that.
If you go on to do any monitoring and you look at the effect of alcohol on your heart rate and your heart rate variability and
it's such a bummer.
Your sleep, like your sleep architecture, so you're like your slow wave sleep and your REM sleep.
Yeah.
It is
crazy.
Amazing. It is like,
and Dan's not getting blackout. Like he's not having many, many drinks. It's like,
no, it's crazy. Like it is nuts. And like I can look at a sleep trace now and go, I drank on that day.
That's the
one where I had. And it's interesting that I think that when I look at if I look at myself, I can have one drink. So I generally will drink a beer or something and it won't affect my sleep architecture and my heart rate and that sort of stuff. If I have 2, it'll affect it a little bit. And if I have 3 and above, Done.
So.
And it's interesting. You'll then also find that different types of alcohol will affect your heart rate and your heart rate variability differently. So beer versus scotch versus red wine, if you want to know,
hard
if
alcohol
you're thinking
versus...
about what does Dan drink, is like it affects me physiologically differently. And it's I'm like, oh my God. So anyway, very interesting.
Yeah.
Good motivator to get off the terps. So
and this is where like using alcohol to deal with anxiety or grief and all of the stuff that accompanies, chronic or complex pain is not helpful because it shoots you in the foot. And it's a coping mechanism, right? In a lot of cases. And, cannabis is similar. It's hard because if you cannot fall asleep, it is better to use something that helps you fall asleep and at least not be in that horrible cycle of like, but I cannot get any recovery. But if you get too tolerant or you use it too much, or again, all the time, long term, you run into these sort of upside downside calculations again, where how much harm and how much is it affecting your sleep quality, even if it makes it easier to fall asleep. And then can you play with the dosage? So some of those things that we use to help us fall asleep, you have to look at what the downside is, even when there's other upsides, or from a pain management perspective, right? Cannabis has some value. Alcohol is not the same, but it has similar downsides from a sleep perspective.
It's interesting. Like once again, the whole CBD, THC discussion, like we are in Australia, we're new to it. Like it's a very new component of, medicalized marijuana in Australia and access to it. So I think our skill base around dealing with it is nowhere near what, your skill base in the US is like. Certainly my experience with it is it's just another drug. It's got it's
upsides,
like everything else.
Side effects.
It works really, really, really well
does it
for
help
some people.
Better? Right.
Yeah, but it's like every drug. Like for some people, it works excellently and is an absolute life changer. For most people, it does bugger all. And if you look at the data, if you look at, so pregabalin or Lyrica, which is the most common name, its number needed to treat is 8. And I see the 1 in 8 person at about that ratio, I reckon. And it is a game changer. Oh my God, it is amazing. No side effects. Pain goes away. They don't get fatter. They don't have any cognitive dysfunction. Amazing. But that number needed to treat is to get a 30% decrease in pain in one person, which is that one person, is 8. The number needed to treat for CBD THC is 10. To get a 2-point decrease in pain. And so, if not higher, is there the people out there that have an amazing response? Yes. But is it everybody? No. And so I just treat it like another drug, or another medication, and it's expensive. So.
Right. And it's also like, what pieces of pain or the consequences of pain are you treating? Are you treating the lack of coping? Are you trying to treat the lack of, the sleep issue? Or are you treating pain or those things that help you have less pain for the people that those pieces are effective for? But the downside is, it does affect things from a recovery perspective. So
anyway,
nuanced discussion. All right. What is the next one here we want to get
exercise.
Into? Okay. Exercise, my favorite. All right. So in a sleep context, I think the point that I want to make here is to avoid exercise late if you can, but exercising in general is very helpful and important to be able to build sleep drive and actually feel tired, right? Very often when I work with people, it's hard for them to fall asleep because they've been expending so little energy. Like Dan and I talk about how shocking it is how sedentary chronic pain patients really are. Even me, who looks very athletic and strong outside of my structured workouts or my intentional walks, I even am quite sedentary. Now it's better, but it's taken me over 5 years, right, to get my steps up and all these other things around it. And so if you don't expend any energy during the day, it's really hard to fall asleep at night. And so finding the types of movements and the time of day and the windows where you have the ability to tire yourself out in some ways that are reasonable and not causing flaring will help you fall asleep easier at night. What doesn't help is doing like a CrossFit workout at 6 or 7 p.m. because it jacks up, kind of your cortisol and your excitability. And it can be hard to kind of come down after that. Plus for us, we're typically in worse pain anyway, later in the day. So it's not a hard one to convince people to work out earlier if you can, because you will feel the benefits as far as, again, it not being such an uphill battle when you're trying to fall asleep. Whether those are gentle things for you, like Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi, more restorative forms of movement like that, that's great. Start there. And then over time, you can work yourself up to, strength training and being able to kind of express yourself more from an intensity perspective. But these gentler modalities are not useless,
Yeah. And I think that
if you're doing nothing,
you can tap into the pacing episode on how to build your exercise gradually over time with a bunch of different techniques that will allow you to build that sleep drive. And I like that sort of thought process. Like I like the concepts around sleep drive.
Pressure cooker. All right. Screen time. This is the one nobody ever wants to do, right? But it's like limiting screen time is important. And it's not so much like the blue light even that I get hung up about. It's actually the dopamine release when you're sort of scrolling or mindlessly flick, 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 flick. Because every one of those is like a decision, a little hit of dopamine. And that's actually what makes it's like this excitability that then you don't feel it. You're not like, oh my God, I'm so revved up from scrolling, right? You're just scrolling, but your system is registering it. And then when you go to fall asleep, now you've made it much harder. And so at least, if you're going to watch TV and that's something that helps you downregulate and sort of bridge that gap, to sleep, at least pick things that aren't stressful or exciting. Like don't watch stuff that I watch Dateline. So that's not a great example, but things that are like, sometimes it's like, it's just the right amount of time. And it's like, well, my life is not that disastrous, but sometimes things that are I'm still alive, things that are stressful, scary, kind of get you revved up from a energetics perspective are not as good. So like Friends reruns, right? Things that you can watch a little more mindlessly, regardless of the blue light factor, are better. But definitely phones and social media, not the wind down you want.
Yes.
So
I've noticed lately, I've been working on a couple of sort of things I'm developing on the side. And if I am concentrating a lot on it and I'm just like, deep in the zone.
Yeah. In flow.
And then go, because it all takes place out of work hours that I do.
Right.
I don't really, I don't do stuff during work, so I just don't get the time. So I just find that like thinking. And then like, I'm like, need to go to sleep. And then getting to sleep, fail.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I really struggle too, right? But from a pacing perspective, when I don't listen to my own rules and I work a lot late at night, closer to bedtime, it's different than when you shut it down at 6. And it might not be realistic for you to shut it down at 6. Like I totally same. But then be mindful about how you intentionally wind down
at 6. Oh my God.
Like what?
Oh my God. That would be amazing.
That would be so nice.
Dan,
there was like a week that you were like, no, I've been going home at 6. And then you kept going down the rabbit hole. I know.
Yes.
But right.
No, which is it. Okay, so this is a good segue.
Because we are all human.
Instead of me working once I get home again on whatever the hell I'm doing, what relaxation techniques should I be doing?
Oh God, Dan, come on. You need to whip out Insight Timer and be doing your diaphragmatic breathing and your mindfulness recordings, right? And I'm not saying you have to do a body scan, but right, like this is where it's like, instead of working out late, instead of doom scrolling, instead of the things that are doing the opposite of what we'd want, you have to promote relaxation. You have to train your brain. You have to, have ways that, again, you are in control and you're able to impact your nervous system rather than just being reactive. And so some of these less ideal behaviors, if you can replace with these type of behaviors, and it can be like, I'll have my patients like do release techniques in the living room while they're watching something with their partner. It doesn't have to be like, I'm off to do my isolated, boring mindfulness routine, but typically there's kind of 2 parts to it, and we'll get into the wind down, but part 1 of the wind down happens before you're in bed. So prior to that, you have to do things that are putting you in a position to then have an easier time by the time you're in part 2. So some of these relaxation techniques are helpful to actually start before you're literally lying in bed trying to transition to dreamland. So
we're going to not work all the way up till 9:30 and 10 o'clock
10,
and then go straight to bed. We're going to do some relaxation and
breathing,
all that stuff first. All right. Okay.
Dan's not going to do that, but that's okay.
All right. So we'll do more of that in a moment. So one of the things that inevitably takes place, and my kids call this doing a dad, is napping. And so I, on the weekend, without probably fail, will go, I reckon this afternoon's the time, by the way.
After recording.
After I smashed it yesterday. And so today I'm going to go home and do a dad on the couch, where I'm going to fall asleep, have a nap, which is, in this setting, that's okay because I don't don't nap every day of the week.
All the time, right.
But what are we going to do with your napping when is that useful and when is it not useful?
Right. Perfect introductions. This is the thing with napping. It does have utility and it does have value. You just have to be intentional about it, do it for a reason, and not get stuck in this sort of reactive cycle where you're constantly napping during the day, not like Dan as an outlier on the weekends, to recover what you're losing at night, because that you cannot do. And then you're also messing up your sleep cycle because if you think about it from a pressure cooker perspective, it's like a rice cooker, right? It's like boiling, it's steaming, it's all in there. And then when you open it, it's like, poof. So that's what you want at night to sort of build that sleep drive. And then at night, when you finally try to fall asleep, you have all that accumulated, I'm ready. But if you release that during the day, that's why it makes it really hard to then.
I think I'm going to say something that might be somewhat perceived as racist, but that is like a white person's rice cooker. Like, I don't think
now I feel racist.
That is a white person's rice cooker from like 1970 something. What is that? I don't think
I'm like, I'm gonna go check my rice cooker. What do you mean?
Okay, like who's used that?
When you open it,
that's a white person's rice cooker, not like the way it gets done in the rest of the world.
I know. That's like when I was younger, I was like, I'm not white, I'm European. Like, made me prouder. And then I was like, oh no, that's the worst.
Okay,
that's very white.
Okay, can I just suggest you go and buy a rice cooker made in China, because they do really good rice in China.
They do, do they?
They do. And use that instead of your little thing that goes woo.
My little crock pot. It's like a siren.
Oh my God. Okay.
Oh my God, my face
Moving
hurts.
on.
Anyway, the hypothetical rice cooker analogy.
I'm going to buy one for you on Amazon.
Dan and I are just endlessly shipping stuff from America and Australia to each other.
No, buy yourself a Chinese-made rice cooker.
Oh my God,
it'll change your life. Okay,
it will change your life.
It'll change your life if you're like using like the pressure thingy. Get out of crowd. Move on.
Okay, so. That is the downside of napping, that if you nap all the time or you rely on napping to feel energized, you're screwed. You're shooting yourself in the foot and you're paying for it at night. So this happens though, because we have less energy in the afternoon. It's this classic mid-afternoon slump. Even if you have decent sleep, like that 1 to 3 p.m. window is challenging, which is actually normal because it coincides with the sun's rhythm and of our own sort of circadian rhythm cycle, where we're more energized in the morning. And then we get kind of fatigued in the early-ish afternoon because our body is actually preparing for evening. So some of these processes are going on that set us up to sleep at night. And that's part of why you get a little bit tired during that window. What I often see is poor food hygiene, right? Like lack of fueling or super high, larger carb sources at once, compounding that effect, right? It makes you even more fatigued. You don't have energy if you don't eat, and you kind of get a crash if you eat a lot of carbs, low protein. We talked about that sort of satiety energy piece. And then people are like, oh, why am I so, crashing at that time? And then you're like, I need my afternoon coffee to combat that window. And then, right, you're sort of piling on challenges down the line. So rather than relying on caffeine, right, there are things that you can do to help get through that window. And at times, can napping be something that you go to? So given that generally it's not ideal and it's something that you want to avoid, and they don't compensate for nighttime sleep or lack of sleep at night, they can be helpful if you're struggling with sleep. And, sometimes we just need a break, like with serious pain. I remember in the earlier years of CRPS, I napped as much from an energy perspective as because I simply didn't want to or couldn't be conscious anymore. Like, I need a break. And so a lot of times you can't make it till night the whole time. So if you are really struggling, your recovery has been terrible, your capacity is poor, you're flaring all the time, you're likely in the stage that you're napping a lot and you're relying on that to get by. What you want to do over time is start to anchor your sleep and wake cycle and get better recovery at night so that those naps become more of an outlier rather than the regular sort of all the time occurrence. And just like any habit you want to change, it goes from being all the time to I do it less to I do it only when I need it or here or there, which is fine. If you're going to nap, some of the strategies are keep it to like under 90 minutes, definitely one sleep cycle. I go back and forth, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Dan, with waking yourself up earlier or out of a sleep cycle, sort of like a 30 or a 60-minute nap. I personally often feel more tired than if I kind of go a full sleep cycle. But you can look at it both ways, where some people do great with shorter naps. They don't wake up more fatigued from it. And then that's fine. So test yourself.
Yeah, I think there's some data around using short sleep cycles. So like a 20-minute, you lay down, fall asleep, set the alarm, 20 minutes, wake up. I think there is some data around that. You don't have that.
There definitely is. So, it just isn't realistic for me. Like a 20-minute nap does me no really.
So that's because you've got to individualize it. So, the group data says that go 20 minutes. The JUZ data says it doesn't work on JUZ for 20 minutes. So you've got to go longer.
And that's the evidence-based approach, right? You use the group data and then
group data, use the best available data and then,
apply it to the individual.
What's appropriate for the patient. So, and I think that everybody should be doing something along those lines.
Yeah. So see where you fit or what feels good in that sort of 30 to 90 minute window. And we'll go through some examples of napping that vary in there. And then you can see how you feel when you wake up and out of that nap. So that's the first thing is don't nap super, super long if you can help it. Because obviously pressure cooker, more let out, it's harder. So then the other piece of that is to avoid from a timing perspective, napping too late in the afternoon. Because again, if you start your nap at like 3 or 4 p.m., and you're waking up at 4:30, 5:30, that's going to make it really, really hard to fall asleep at night, as opposed to if you can get to your nap more like 1 or 2 p.m., again, at the very latest 2, because then at least you're up by, 3:30 at the latest, and it has less of an impact on falling asleep again at night. With that being said, different types of naps that you can take, given the context, is how we're going to run through them. If you have, loss of sleep the previous night, that's a good time to look at it from a recovery nap perspective to help compensate a bit, even though it's not as good and not the same. If you know that you're going to lose sleep in the future, right? Like, you have a concert coming up, or you're going to get to sleep late or sleep little in a future sort of stretch, you can look at it from a prophylactic preemptive strategy and take a nap ahead of time. I will do this from a pacing perspective often, kind of force myself to rest or lay down or something like that so that I have enough for later, or I don't create a pile up over time. If you want to just improve energy, focus, or attention, kind of for something that you have to do later in the day, or I want to be my best for that thing later, sometimes it's okay to sacrifice a little sleep quality maybe and take sort of a nap just so that you feel better for the event. That's kind of like the power nap.
Like the pre-podcast.
Yes. When I'm like, Dan, can we meet later so I can go in between? A little bit later? I'm not going to complain, but we do record in the middle of the day for me, and it's the worst. It's not Dan's fault. It is what it is, but I'm just like, it's never perfect. Yes. So that's a great example where I want to be able to not be like, brain foggy, comatose when we record, because then I get sad. That's not good for anyone.
Yeah, no, true.
That's not good. All right. And then from a sort of a memory learning perspective, right? Again, you can see how why you're napping depends on your goals or the context or what you want to achieve. And so if you want to be able to integrate new memories, learn stuff, right? Napping before studying can be helpful too. So if you're looking at it from a long-term memory, like storage perspective, like we talked about, making room for some new stuff coming in. And this one might be kind of my favorite, just because.
Tell me about. I'm looking at the Nappucino.
Nappucino.
So tell me what. I've never heard this before. You've never told me about the Nappucino.
Nappuccino's top secret.
Tell us about the Nappucino.
So this is like a very short-term nap. For example, on the small end of that 30 to 90 minute, you can take your shot of espresso, drink your coffee, and then lie down for like 20 minutes before it even hits you. And then when you wake up, you have the caffeine kind of coming on board, and you're like, all right, let's take on the day. So the goal of the little, that's how it would theoretically work, is you nap, but just enough so that when you're waking up, then you're caffeinated.
I'm gonna try Nappucino this afternoon.
We might create a monster. You're not allowed. You can't do that, Dan.
No. I'm trying that. The Nappuccino.
Yeah. Dan's looked at every way to have more energy. It's like so unfair. This partnership is so unfair. The struggle bus, and Dan's like king of optimizing everything. Creates pit state.
It's true.
It is. It is. Now I'm over it. But
all right, I'll get back to you about the Nappucino later today.
Okay. So Dan will test our Nappucino. You guys test the Nappucino, right? So you can see how as you start to gain a little bit more control over your sleep cycle and you're less reactive and just responsive to like, I have to lie down, you get to have a say and you get to be mindful and aware of why and when you integrate different types of naps so that you can actually function better rather than just like survive, because that's not fun.
All right. External environment. So what else you got to do? Like, I think this is a lot of stuff you see on there.
Yeah, this is like the classic, I don't want to hear this sort of like boring.
Yeah, this is the thing you Google, what do you do to improve sleep? So what's Google's answer with a bit of jazz angle on it?
Yeah. So this is readily available information. Exactly. Everybody knows, but do we do it? Let's try. So obvious, right? Our immediate environment, sort of from a bedroom perspective, you want to optimize that space. So whether it's the temperature, the sound, how noisy it is, how calming it is, how stressed out you feel, in your bedroom matters. It's kind of like an inside joke with one of my clients and I, but I was trying to get her to make the bedroom somewhere that she feels more like comfortable and happy and sort of able to do mindfulness in there. And I was like, you just have to zen the shit out of your bedroom. It's got to be a space where you feel like, not super cluttery, right? Crap is everywhere. And it's no judgment on like our level of organization, but it's just from a nervous system perspective, if you can make your bedroom somewhere that you look forward to being, it's helpful.
Make it look like my kids' bedrooms.
That's why kids struggle with sleep. There's a lot of reasons, but yeah. They also don't care. They don't need like
they don't care. That is the other thing.
And that's what's hard, right? Other people don't have to do all this stuff. When you have chronic, widespread pain, you don't get a choice. You have to do this stuff. Kids get a choice. So from a light perspective, right, make sure the room is as dark as possible. It's kind of obvious. Use blackout curtains if you can. You can use an eye mask if that's not annoyingly uncomfortable. Cover little blue lights or things from the TV or the DVR or whatever it may be so that it's as pitch black as possible. I already touched on sound. The other side of that, besides making it as quiet as possible, then again, urban environments affect this, whether you live in a city, close to a road, I get it. But also for some people, using white noise or having some noise all the time is actually helpful as opposed to pure silence, because it does weirdly make you focus on the pain more in a way. There is some sort of element, I think, of distraction when people like or benefit from white noise. So try that or be open to that. And if you are struggling to sleep, it might be something that helps. Earplugs are self-explanatory if you're just trying.
I think that reminds me of a patient I saw that had been traveling along really, really well. And then they moved house, and we were struggling to find why had their pain gone off all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the conversation, I picked up that they'd moved house, but they'd moved onto a corner block, which was at a T intersection for a set of trams. And so as the trams were going past his bedroom at whatever time of night, he was waking up every time the tram went past. It was like, oh, okay, that'll be. And so
annoying.
His sleep had gone completely out the window. And we were then in sort of, okay, how are we going to deal with the tram noise now without getting you to move house?
Right.
I don't remember how we dealt with it, but anyway, nonetheless.
Earplugs. Yeah. But that's a great example of how sleep affects pain, lack of sleep affecting pain. And what do you need to address, right? And kind of, finding that thing. Good example. All right. Temperature, cool room. I think everybody knows this. Falling asleep when you're hot is hard. Between 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 19 Celsius is typically pretty ideal. There's different ways to achieve that, right? Whether you have AC. Here in San Diego, I don't even have AC, for example. So you have to use fans, mattress coolers, different things. If you're sensitized, at least with CRPS, you have that burning sort of hot effect to your limb. Having the fan placed so that it hits the leg or the arm, whichever affected part of your body, can be helpful to kind of help you feel cooler, because that spot will often feel very, very hot in comparison. This is where some of the strategies like taking a warm shower before bed can be a little helpful, because they lower your core temperature, because it helps blood move more to the peripheries. So then your core temperature is lower when you're trying to fall asleep, which is what matters and why the ancillary temperature is significant.
So I do the opposite.
And I was just going to say, and Dan does the opposite. So it's like see what we're, I don't like hot showers either. Because I looked at all that stuff, because I was looking at stuff with all my monitors and stuff, and having a hot shower made no difference to my sleep. But I'd read somewhere, random internet fact of someone who was using an Aura, I think, and they found that having a cold shower significantly shifted their deep sleep.
because that was the thing I was really trying to work on. I went, I'll give it a crack. And so I find that having a cold shower actually improves my deep sleep before I go to sleep and shifts my HRV quite significantly. I think what's happening there is that the cold
like stimulates
this parasympathetic outflow is effectively what it does. Yeah. So you get an increase in parasympathetic activity due to the cold, it drops your heart rate, and that increases your heart rate variability.
Right. And that upside is better or more significant than the core temperature variability, like 100%.
Yeah. And so it's then having some effect on your sleep cycle as well. So anyway, one of those things that I was able to personalize, stuff for me based on data I'd collected. So
yeah, that's a good one. All right. Smell wise, sometimes I personally don't love this. Sometimes pleasant scents can be nice for people. Lavender is a bit of a fan favorite. I hate lavender. So again, it just depends. And a lot of people with MCAS or some of the hypermobility related stuff can be sensitive to smell. So it is another one of those just depends. Don't light a candle that, ticks you off versus for someone else, the candle's really nice and it helps them fall asleep. So be mindful of that. And then from a touch sort of sensory perspective, right, those of us with CRPS or sensitization with the allodynia component, sheets, no matter what, they can be extremely aggravating, but it's something to look at if you can make it a little bit less awful, or using barriers or using a compression even, or things like that at night to help that aspect of your environment and the immediate spot that you're sleeping. But that makes it hard. And that's why desensitizing and distraction from a wind down sleep perspective is important, because you're up against all of these challenges.
So you've sort of gone through internal stuff, external things. How do you then start to deal with your circadian rhythm type abnormalities? So how do you improve that, melatonin's going down in the morning?
Right, cortisol going up.
Cortisol's going up and vice versa towards the end of the evening to try and sort all that stuff out.
Yeah.
What strategies you got for that?
Yeah. And that's another, this shows also why it's not just managing your stress that's going to impact your cortisol levels in the morning, but it's the other stuff around that that's going to have an impact on when melatonin and cortisol learn to automatically rise and fall. And just like Dan alluded to, melatonin in the morning should be low. Over the course of the day, then it's creeping higher. Opposite is true for cortisol, right? You want it coming up high in the morning, and then over time, we need it to be lower when we're falling asleep. So it's inverse waves. And that's what you're basically trying to regulate from a nervous system perspective with your circadian rhythm. And so that's kind of what my little saying, that's too simplistic, but accurate, where it's like routine is an antidote to stress sort of comes from, because you want more of these things to be automatic and automated and like set up for success instead of you fighting your body's rhythm, right? So imagine if you could help being jet lagged or not when you're trying to fall asleep. I'd rather have the struggles of pain in an environment where those things are working for me more than against me. So circadian rhythm is kind of like the 30,000 foot environmental perspective, because it's what's around you. It's not your behavior or what's in your bedroom. So some of the behaviors though that are tied to that are sun exposure, right? We spend now in modern society a ton of time inside and a ton of time under bright lights all the time. So we've lost our ability to sort of naturally know, because of the angle that the sun hits our eyes at, what time of day it is. Because if I have overhead lights on in my office at 9 p.m., my brain is like, cool, it's noon. And so it's, again, confusing your body rather than helping it sort of know what time it is automatically so it can regulate you. So try to get natural sunlight. Just like with sleep, you can think of it as bookending things. Morning, dawn, and dusk are ideal times. If you can get a midday glance in there, that's helpful. Obviously, some of us just work all day and we're inside, and that's not realistic. But if you can at least get 2 points, that's really helpful. And then also limit the overhead lighting. So have lighting that's more on your desk, like coming at you rather than from overhead. Along with that, right, we talked about bookending things. You have to bookend your sleep and wake time. I had to go back and forth because it depends on the patient of which one is easier to regulate first. Ideally, you can try it for both at the same time, but it depends on your schedule. If it's someone who's sleeping really late and you feel comfortable committing to a wake up time, that then is going to affect, right, how quickly do you get tired? When do you get tired at night? And then that you can anchor, or you commit to, hey, I'm going to bed at a certain time instead of being up until 2 or 3 in the morning watching YouTube, distracting myself. And then you quickly regulate the wake time to follow.
So you just referred to that as bookending, where and then flicked into anchoring. But I really like that concept of anchoring because I think that that's really easy to be able to explain to people, in that you just go, okay, I want you to anchor one thing, whether it's when you go to bed or when you get out of bed. For managing your circadian rhythm stuff, that can be the easy start point. Where you just go, you know what? I am just going to set my alarm and I am getting out of bed at whatever, 7:30, 7, 6, whatever.
Yeah, and you can start it at 9 and then move it closer to your goal. I eventually want to be out of bed at 7:30, but inch there.
Yeah. And that process of anchoring one, then going on and then anchoring the second, because as soon as you're starting to wake up at a reasonable hour and you're not in bed until 11 or 12, you're starting to build your sleep drive because you've been up. And so that then everything starts to work together. But you got to anchor something first.
Pick one.
Pick one. And I love that concept of anchoring. So
thanks. That's a good one. And that too is really what I'll start with anyone on, and then these things in parallel alongside it. So pick that and then go from there. I talked about routine already being the antidote to stress. Our body sort of automatically having a sense of what happens when is helpful. Circadian rhythm is very tied to all of that. And again, this is all based upon the natural sort of sun-moon cycle. The challenges that we have with working late, with being in sunlight, with being super stressed, with struggling to keep routines, with napping during the day, you can see how this like quickly gets pretty out of hand. And then it makes it really, really hard to fall asleep at night when your body is like, what are you talking about? As opposed to, I'm on board with this. This is what we do. And so that's where you kind of have to train your body, train yourself, and these things become easier. But even for me, it took years with how awful my sleep-wake cycle was to begin with. And then developing CRPS and like waking up initially like at 3, I couldn't make it past 6 p.m., conscious. So then I'm falling asleep like at 7, 8 p.m., waking up at 2, 3 a.m. That was my shift. And then pushing it over, over time. So that became more normalized. And then, all right, I'm waking up at 6, which means I'm going to bed at 11. It's a little better. And then as you become, more able and capable, you're like, no, 6 hours of sleep is not enough. Now we need to make that 8. And so you, like with everything else, earn more, freedom in a way, and it becomes less difficult, but you have to go through these like non-negotiables. And then if you're still struggling, that's where you can go back to the last episode and, maybe there's underlying other issues. Like, are you snoring? Do you have some other sleep disorder that's making it harder?
I think you just said that you get more freedom. I think like I'm going to reference Jocko Willink here, but, discipline equals freedom. Okay,
right. It's not freedom to go to bed whenever you want. It's like by doing these things, you earn. Yes, exactly.
And to have less pain and the freedom to do other things. But you've got to be disciplined to start with and if that discipline is around your sleep cycle, that's a great way to start because so many other things then tie into that. Like we already referenced the alcohol, the smoking, how you take your drugs, your exercise cycles. Like if you can start to build discipline in around your sleep, then you get the freedom to get more stuff done, to have less pain, but it's hard. Yeah. Like it is really hard.
It's just like pacing, right? When you have those strategies, it earns you more freedom, but it's hard and it's annoying to do all the time. But if you do it most of the time, or that is your default baseline setting, then when you have a late night out or you go to a show or whatever, like the world doesn't implode because it's just an outlier and your body can sustain that because you're used to a more regular rhythm. So yes, it was perfectly explained, Dan.
Yes, but I've got to do more of it myself. Like I'm so terrible at my sleep stuff. Like anyway, too much work.
Because you don't have awful consequences. Yeah, because you can.
Yeah, I don't have awful consequences, but just think about like I'd be better if I could.
Probably. But you wouldn't get as much work done. All right.
Yeah,
that's basically. And the only other piece I can think of around sort of sun exposure or light exposure is actual sun exposure on your body too, kind of helps that rhythm. And so if you can that's why I like my daily walk. It's like 20 minutes, it's like 2,000 steps. I'm not screwed up after. I can, manage that amount of toll. And I get like 50% of I go shorts, t-shirt, I live in San Diego. So it's like I get a good amount of sun exposure on my skin in those 20 minutes. And then I'm not having like vitamin D issues like trapped in my condo too much. I go to the pool too. I'm good about it.
We're in Melbourne, so we all get vitamin D deficiencies. I can't remember which it is, but either UV, E, B, or C, one of the light waves, is important for creating vitamin D. In Melbourne, you lose the key one, whichever one it is, from light between April and August. And you can be outside as much as you like. There's not the right light wave frequency around to. Is
that why Aussies, despite how outdoorsy you are kind of pale?
No, just Melburnians.
Just
really.
you?
Yeah, just us.
Just you.
So we all get vitamin D deficiencies. Like everyone comes in with a vitamin D deficiency, and
keep that first.
We are the peanut allergy of the world. Plus, I think vitamin D deficiency.
Plus vitamin D.
Anyway,
that's basically circadian rhythm, though, from a pretty basic overview. But there's a lot of habits you can integrate there.
So let's just look at some specific strategies you can use as part of your wind down type approach, so we can start building some of that discipline. So,
actually
so then you're going to become more disciplined, and then what are you going to implement?
Right.
Here we go.
Right. Here we go.
Wired and tired. Tell us about
this is Dan. Everyone wired and tired. Yeah. This was with my dad too. He'd always be like, I fall asleep before my head hits the pillow. Right. Because he also work a lot, really late, loves what he does, hyper focus, and then crash. And so while similarly as alcohol or cannabis, you crash easily, it actually should take your body 20 minutes or so to slowly, naturally shut down like a computer kind of. And if you're not doing that, it's a sign that you're more wired than tired and kind of constantly stimulated. And that's then again, higher cortisol. You're going to have crappier quality sleep. You're going to wake up earlier, more often, and then do it all over again, do it again. And you get in that cycle of, but I fall asleep like a baby. Not always a good thing or something to be proud of. It's actually something to kind of look at and be like, you know what, maybe I should have more of an intentional wind down and moderate myself.
I have some changes to make. Anyway, keep going.
I know,
Tell me what I'm going to do about my wired and tired life.
That's never going to change, but we'll try. So what are you doing with those 20 minutes? This is where it ties into our earlier discussion around you can't be using that to scroll, constant stimulation, right? Lack of buffer time, overhead lights, high cortisol, high pain. Also, that's when we have high anxiety, right? Our thoughts come out. We're not distracted by all the other stuff throughout the day. So this is what results in then groggier mornings, worse quality sleep, way more tossing and turning. And honestly, the frustration and anxiety around even the process of falling asleep, because then if you're not the wired and tired crash type, it literally creates a dread and a fear of the night, not because you're scared of the night, but because falling asleep is miserable. And so you have to have techniques and strategies that you go to make this more of an intentional process so that, again, you're less reactive and you're in charge. So whether you're the wired and tired end of the spectrum or the dreading, extremely frustrated, hate this part of the day end of the spectrum, you have to do the same stuff basically. And that's actually why I did a challenge a while ago where I think 40 or so complex pain patients all signed up for this 1 week challenge where we worked on breathing and mindfulness techniques at night. 2 things, right? Really simple. And can you, for 7 days, integrate these different strategies, whether from a diaphragmatic breathing perspective to combat the physical downregulate or a mindfulness perspective to combat the anxiety, thinking, that piece of things. Yeah. And so this is the hardest patient population to do that with because we have so many challenges with falling asleep. And even they had an easier time falling asleep, could fall asleep faster. We're shocked at wow, this stuff, because it's hard to convince people that when your pain is so extreme, some stupid little breathing or a little mindfulness recording is really going to help. I know this is the truth. It's totally true. But you have to have a way to communicate with your nervous system and to, trigger safety rather than the default, tiger, not rest and digest that we get caught in with these type of pathologies in particular. So that's why even though it's the most counterintuitive and the most difficult, once you get the hang of it and you're more consistent, it actually has a disproportionate impact than someone who just has knee pain. No offense, just chronic, regular knee pain, right? Not sensitized. There aren't all these other things. Yeah, wind down routine is important and will help. But for people that are highly sensitized, that's where it's a non-negotiable because it does make a difference. So from a breathing perspective, we want to focus on nasal breathing, having it be diaphragmatic where you're getting that rib cage expansion. And if you can, kind of focusing on tempo. So slowing it down, having your exhales be twice as long as your inhales, if you can handle that, and just work your way up to that. So you can start even just having some simple tactile feedback. Oh God, God damn it. Hands around the ribs, right? And you can feel the lateral expansion. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see my rib cage going in and out versus when we're all, panty in our chest, kind of breathing like a dragon is what I titled a webinar I did on breathing, because we all get very flighty. And if you put your hand on your chest, that's where you'll feel the expansion instead of 360 degrees actually using your diaphragm like you should. So
of these, I really like, I think it's referred to as resonant breathing. So basically it's the way to think about it is you sort of breathe in for 6 and you breathe out for 6. And so you're effectively having 5 breaths per minute. And I like that as a simple way to go as well for people, because it's easy to count to 6. So just count to 6 on the way in and count to 6 on the way out. And that can be a simple way that people step into the whole breathing technique piece as well. Yeah. There's also the little apps you can use to sort of, watch the little thing get bigger and
bigger, smaller. I have some patients who really like these, and it helps them stay consistent.
And I think they're also easy ways into the whole breathing side of things.
Yeah. And breathing is our most fundamental movement pattern, basically, is how I explain it to people. So obviously we're all breathing, we're okay, but communicating stress to your nervous system all the time versus calm is a big difference. And so these, strategies you can practice, you need to practice at rest when you're conscious, obviously, in different positions, whether that's, 90-90 on your back with your legs bent. This was my knee, feet on a sofa. So kind of is relaxing in that way. And you can put your hand on your top of your chest, like I talked about, and then on your abdomen, and kind of feel not moving from your chest and more so from your belly, even though I hate the term belly breathing, because you don't just want to protrude your belly. You want to get 360-degree expansion, but it helps differentiate chest breathing versus, all right, at least we're moving lower now. You can also practice crocodile breathing, or in child's pose, where you put a pillow kind of on your stomach and you lie on it, and it helps the breath go more into your back. Like for me, it's really hard to expand where my battery is. My body just doesn't want to do anything, and I have to really practice for it to become more automatic. And then that transfers to not just the times that you're not practicing this during the day, right, for 5 minutes at a time or whatever it may be, but most importantly to when you are asleep at night and you don't want to be doing all the stuff that makes it harder to fall asleep or leads to some of these other coexisting things. So practice at rest, right? Be aware of breathing through your nose, lengthening the exhales, increasing the tempo as you get more comfortable, use different positions, use different apps, and then progress things gradually, right? And this is also a big piece of movement from a stability perspective. You have to be able to breathe and brace. And if you can't even breathe at rest, what do you think is happening in higher intensity situations? So practice when it's easy, it transfers to when you're unconscious, and then you can do it when it matters even more in other settings. In the wind down setting, right, just do it with then mindfulness, whether that's a recording. I like recordings. I find it helpful to have something else to focus on. You can also do different things like, right, just simply observing your own thoughts, letting them pass, practicing that as if it was a leaf on a stream thing. What I like to do basically is put it all together with this bad mindfulness framework. So breathing, awareness, distancing. So breathe diaphragmatically, become aware of the thoughts that you're having when you silence everything else, and then practice not getting caught up in those thoughts and getting in the loop of, oh, that's a stressful, scary thought, and now I'm, going down that rabbit hole. So it is a practice, and using breathing to help you sort of become less reactive to those thoughts. And a tape can help you do that, or whatever. Body scans. I don't love body scans with sensitization. It's what works for you.
Yeah. That approach. I have so many patients with ADHD, and I think that you talk to them mindfulness, and they look at you like, are you
cringe.
Crazy? But I think that if you do have ADHD, the thing is not to, focus on one thing, because that's not happening. But the thing is to focus on is just to watch where your thoughts go. You're like, look at it go there. Oh, we're over there now.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Now we're back
right.
there.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yes.
That's the mindfulness technique that you want to use when you've got ADHD. Don't try and focus on streams and stuff. That's not happening.
No, it's letting your thoughts like go by like a stream. Like even regular people, mindfulness is not about not having thoughts or controlling your thoughts. It's about observing your thoughts in a non-judgmental way, just like Dan's talking about. And like, oh, that's interesting. Wow, look, I had like 78 thoughts in 5 minutes because of the way one of my patients just did this exercise. It's called Where Does Your Mind Live? So like put 5 minutes on the clock and notice, does your mind wander to the distant past, childhood shit? Does it go to the near past? Is it the present? Is it distant future or near future? Sorry. And then distant future, like who's going to take care of me when I'm old and alone and crippled? Like where does your brain tend to go? And if you have certain neurodivergence, you're going to think of a lot of stuff. That's fine. Practice stepping away from those thoughts and just letting them go by. And then over time, it gets easier and you're not so consumed by them. So
release techniques. This is new because I hadn't, until talking to you, I hadn't really talked about release techniques before. So breathing and mindfulness, yes.
Is nice, techniques. But so sometimes it's kind of like you need, getting stress and tension out of your body isn't just mental. Sometimes you kind of need like this physical way to release them. And so I have a little bit of a different intention with how I use release techniques in this setting. Yes, you want to use them on shortened muscles to alleviate length tension relationships, like in the context of then activating the right stuff and getting stronger. But from a complex pain perspective, they're a really helpful way, just like breathing, to downregulate, to desensitize, to increase that parasympathetic sort of activation and also temporarily change the sensory environment, right? If something's really sensitive and bothersome, if you release something somewhere else, it's kind of like, hey, brain, look over here. And you get comfortable flirting with that line of, it's a little uncomfortable, but now it feels good. And everybody has different, problem areas. My hamstrings are always short, right? Because it's too much. Other people, it's their T-spine, and so you learn where are the appropriate spots to use them for you. But the intention is different than when it's just in a gym setting or from a warm-up perspective to sort of bridge the gap and transition from rest to excitation and then from workout to rest. So I like release techniques in sort of the pre-wind down setting, like I talked about when you're in the living room with your spouse or hanging out watching TV, whatever it may be. And it can help you just be in a better position than when you try to go to bed. So I do like them for that intention with this population. And I never see them used like with complex pain patients. And I think it's such an interesting way to progress desensitization, really, in between fitness, right? Because you're practicing flirting with that line of, oh, I don't like this. And then you're using breathing to manage your nervous system through that experience and sort of reteach yourself like, oh, that wasn't that bad, not a threat. And then you have less kind of in other contexts. So as tolerated and on areas that are less sensitive to begin with. And then as you get more comfortable, you can use them on the affected area. So I always start away from the most painful spot. We're not trying to torture you, but if you do it elsewhere, it helps distract, downregulate, and then you can work your way to actually using it, like you more commonly see your
nice. Work. Graded exposure.
Yeah, snuck it in there. Beautiful. Always graded exposure. So that's that piece of that. From a combination perspective, right? That is essentially then your wind down routine. And of those different strategies, right? You pick what works for you under those buckets. What type of breathing practice? What type of mindfulness recording or, thing that you do out on your own is helpful. And that's where you can break it down from a managing the physical discomfort perspective and the emotional challenges with falling asleep. And that's why I like 20-minute-ish recordings, because it kind of trains my body to shoot for that 20-minute-ish time, to wind down. And again, for me too, it took years to get to a point where it wasn't hours of like frustration and tossing and turning, and then it gets better over time. So don't make it harder on yourself, right? Engage in relaxing things, not stimulating things before bed. And if you can do both of those, it's like a double positive shift. So decrease the bad, increase the good, and you have much less of an uphill battle because it's already hard enough. Don't make it harder. That's my 2 cents on that.
All right.
That's pretty much.
That is gold.
Thank you.
I will.
Make sleep great again. I hate using that phrase, even as a joke, but sleep doesn't have to suck, and the strategies for it don't have to be lame. You have to do it in a way that works for you, though. So if you're neurodivergent, you can't squeeze a square peg into a round hole. Adapt.
Nice. All right. So that puts together basically the medical component and the conservative component of how you manage sleep. If you want to, if you've just listened to this episode, go back and listen to the first part and sort of you hear us rabbit on about all the different medical components that you might be experiencing in some of the other medical approaches. And that wraps it up. That was good. I enjoyed that. I'm going to try and be better with my sleep. I'm going to not
Dan's inspired.
Yeah, I'm inspired. I'm not going to go to bed
this week.
Wired and tired.
Wired and tired.
And unfortunately, it probably will be for this week, but I'm going to try and get more disciplined. There you go.
That is your specialty.
Discipline equals freedom. Thank you, Jocko Willink.
That's it. All right. So for supplementary information, as we've been mentioning, make sure you're signed up for our newsletter, and we're going to start propagating more information on our website. So after episodes, go to the website page for additional context and more summaries around what we talk about so you can actually implement it.
All right. Excellent. All right. Thanks, Giles.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Clearly, this is a podcast. It's for informational purposes. It's not a consult, medical advice, or the practice of medicine, and it doesn't form a therapeutic relationship. If you feel the information might be useful for your situation, before applying it to yourself or others, you should speak with your doctor or your treating clinician. Do not delay in seeking a diagnosis or treatment, and applying the information is at the listener's own risk.